Thank you, Mark, and a big hello from London. Okay, so the first week of 2025, even if it is only a partial week, this past week has seen a large number of weekly technical patterns. Now, you could argue it was because the shortened week over Christmas, and you would be right on that, at least normally you'd be right on it. However, I think there are many other forces in play here, some quite complex, leading to some interesting weekly patterns over last week. Plus, many countries do not celebrate Christmas, so you can throw that into the mix as well. So, let's look at some of the weekly patterns, and perhaps the most interesting feature seen was the very large number of weekly key reversals seen last week in the currencies. A market that only recognizes New Year's Day as an international official holiday. Last week there were weekly key reversals up in US dollar Canadian dollar, US dollar Swedish krona, US dollar Danish krona, US dollar Romanian leu, US dollar Hungarian forint, US dollar Hong Kong dollar, US dollar Bulgarian lev, US dollar Macedonian dinar, the US dollar CNY, the Chinese yuan onshore 1-year NDF, and the US dollar Thai baht, if only just on this last one. At the same time, there were weekly key reversals down in the euro against the US dollar, euro yen, sterling against the US dollar, aka cable, sterling against the Japanese yen, the Kiwi dollar against the US dollar Indonesian rupiah, and US dollar Colombian peso. As you can see, the moves were not all one way. There were also weekly key reversals up last week in spot gold, which had seen some very, very limited follow-on higher moves this week. And in spot silver, if only just on this latter one last week. This week we are seeing the beginnings of a follow-on higher here as well. Finally, I also include in here Ripple coin, the cryptocurrency, which had a large, seemingly defining weekly key reversal up last week. And this week has seen a distinct reactionary move lower yesterday, though I suppose it has been limited as last week's move here was quite large, and we are still within last week's range this week. Apart from these numerous weekly key reversals seen in the currencies and related markets, we had an interesting number of weekly key reversals last week in some of the commodities. We saw a weekly key reversal up last week in New York sugar futures, which most pointedly had a seeming aborted attempt at a follow-on higher on Monday this week, and is now lower compared to Friday's close, though still within last week's range. I detail more on what is going on here in New York sugar in my recent weekly sugar video commentary, including the details on the primary target X below in the 1850 zone and a secondary hard to reach target X1 in the 1760 zone. Then there is Bursa Malaysia crude palm oil futures, which had a weekly key reversal down last week and an attempt earlier this week at a follow-on lower, which has not gone so well, with prices meeting some stiff support dating from 2023 and some even support from 2015 to 2017. I detail these more fully in my recent weekly oilseed and veg oil video commentary. In energy, we had a weekly key reversal down last week in NYMEX Henry Hub Natgas futures in the US, but this week there's been a strong reactionary move higher, back up, though it is still within last week's range and mostly within last Friday's range. We also had a somewhat esoteric weekly key reversal up in the SGX SICOM TSR20 rubber futures out in Singapore, which saw a gapping move lower during this last week actually, and that's as a follow-on, but also the start of a reactionary move back up as the downside was seemingly overextended, and the reactionary move back up has started this week. Now, there are two final groupings of commodities which I would like to discuss along with their relevant weekly technical patterns. The first group is grains, and we had consistent and uniform weekly key reversals down last week across three of these. In Minneapolis wheat futures, in Kansas City wheat futures, and in Chicago wheat futures. None of these have seen any follow-on lower moves this week. Instead, a reactionary moves back up, though still within last week's range. I detail all these three markets in my recent weekly grains technical analysis commentaries. The second category, or grouping, is not so uniform, but they are all LME metals. We had a weekly key reversal down last week in LME 3-month zinc. This was a fresh move lower after prices in mid-December reached the downside targets for a mid-November to mid-December double top pattern. This led on this week to the lowest low and lowest close since late September 2024. There was also a weekly key reversal down in LME 3-month nickel last week on the lows of the market, but this has instead seen a reactionary move back up this week, though it has been limited as it's still within last week's range right now. Finally, there was a contrary one, a weekly key reversal up last week in LME 3-month tin, which has seen a more than satisfactory follow-on move higher this week. Prices followed on higher this week, and we are close now to testing the highest seen up in mid-December 2024. I cover all these metals and others in my recent weekly LME metals technical analysis video commentary. As always, I'm happy to answer any direct questions with anyone who's interested, and with that I'll finish this section from London, and I hope you found these comments useful.
Thank you for listening and watching this broadcast. This weekly broadcast gives the essential market patterns and consequences. Please be aware of the risk disclaimer posted both at the front and at the back of this broadcast. The copyright is Eddie Tofpik and ADM Investor Services International Limited. And here comes the final important bit.